Recently, a guy named Mackle22 made a video discussing, or mostly crashing out, about the Destiny 2 community. I've been in the community for a long time and decided I'd chime in on the issue because while he did make some good points, I think he could have articulated some things better. Therefore, because I'm such a paragon of intellect, retard, I decided I'd take a crack at this issue. Firstly, he talks about the community hating on trans people, and I'm gonna be frank here, I'm just not gonna discuss this. Do I think I could? Yes. Do I think there are clueless retards in the Destiny community who stomp all over complex issues? Also yes. Personally, I think I'm way too autistic to bring any emotional perspective to the topic. However, one comment I will make is that in incredibly high volume communication, all nuance is lost and only the most primitive opinions and standpoints remain. I think that's what's happening here. Moving on to the first point I actually want to touch on, he criticizes the community at large for complaints made by specific subgroups. Destiny 2 has a very wide audience, which means there are effectively infinite subgroups all talking about and sharing opinions or disagreeing at any given time. To criticize the entire group for the opinions of a few is to miss the entire point of discourse in the first place. You're just yelling into the void, essentially. That being said, I think that Bungie does cultivate this constant disagreement by making Destiny 2 a game for everyone. Whether this is done accidentally or purposefully for the sake of increased online discourse and thus more population and attention is entirely for you to decide. This philosophy does actually have merit, however, as it allows Bungie to attain the significant funding required for endgame content even though few people will actually play said content. What this means for Bungie, though, is that they need to be incredibly careful about which voices are listened to regarding which issues. For example, a low manner or frequent raider is probably going to provide better feedback about contest content than someone whose favorite content is mindlessly grinding strikes. As a side note here, we as creators also need to be careful which voices we amplify, because we could end up misattributing the feedback and make Bungie's already nigh impossible job even harder. Getting back to the main point of this video though, yelling at a group is pointless. Groups are not people and will not respond like a person when you throw even good arguments at them. The most you can hope for is to change the opinions of a few people every time you bring up the topic, because once groups are large enough they generally do not change unless significant amounts of time are involved. This is how we end up with people still complaining about sunsetting or the game going free to play. These people obviously haven't played the game in a while, but due to the nature of large groups, there will always, or at least for a very long time, be people with opinions formed around outdated information. It doesn't help that Bungie releases information bits at a time in an unbelievably convoluted manner, though. Can you really blame people then if they're running off of old information when patch notes literally aren't even in the game? Further exacerbating this group sentiment issue is the fact that chats and comments are usually negatively slanted. In my opinion, the cause of this issue is something I'm calling disagreement survivorship bias. It's pretty simple, but I haven't heard anyone talk about it before, so I'll lay out my methodology here. Let's say you have an opinion. If the video or stream you're watching validates that opinion, you feel satisfied and thus say nothing. If it doesn't, however, you feel unsatisfied by this occurrence and that emotion drives you to represent yourself. Thus, opinions that disagree with the video or stream tend to be vocalized or survive more, while opinions agreeing will usually go unvoiced because they effectively already have been. To expand on this phenomenon with even more conjecture, it is logical to assume that composure and intelligence are positively correlated with coherent and logical arguments. It follows then that large communities will have significant numbers of overly emotional, unintelligent people screaming at the top of their lungs, and that these arguments will be almost entirely incoherent, overly negative, and fallacious. Careful moderation and chat rules are how most streamers get around this issue, but when you have 6-digit numbers watching a stream, there is essentially nothing you can do. One easily observed occurrence of this is the Game Awards chat, another is XQC's, and Bungie's YouTube chat, which as far as I know is completely unmoderated, follows this template to an almost tragic degree. Moving on, he talks about content removal and sunsetting, with his first point being that weapons are back now. I do agree, but there are significant exceptions. Mindbenders, for example, is the only aggressive frame in the game that has quick draw, and you haven't been able to acquire it for years. Antiope, with Zen Moment Kill Clip, is essentially a kinetic Shiura's, which means that you can pair it with more powerful energy weapons. Eye of Soul is the only sniper capable of getting 100 handling unconditionally due to celerity, which has been sunset, and was only acquirable at one very small time period in the game. Other weapons have been brought back with significantly worse perks, lacking meta options, or without certain niche features. Palindrome, Found Verdict, and Multimach are respective examples of each issue. Maybe there are PvE examples of this, but I don't know them because I'm mostly invested in PvP. Due to each weapon having a unique feel made up of multiple hidden stats, people get attached to certain weapons, quite literally just because they feel good. Obviously, these people will complain if you force them to stop using these weapons, but does this even matter? That's for Bungie to decide, so we can honestly ignore these types of complaints. Next, he states that raids and campaigns shouldn't have been sunset, which I obviously agree with. It largely seems that this was a bandwidth issue caused by the dogshit engine they're working with. Fixing that would obviously take significant time and money, and due to recent events, I'm pretty black-pilled on our feedback's ability to actually get the required approval for such an undertaking from the fat retarded board suits that have historically done nothing but fuck over the game 7 ways from Sunday. Mackle also talks about how people complain about seasonal content, but that it's always removed anyway. While this is true, Forsaken's seasonal content specifically largely expanded the game's endgame chases rather than simply being slap-on-slop content, which is why it felt pretty bad to lose it. Think about how we could target farm certain weapons with the Chalice of Opulence, or how forged weapons all had unique perk combos in exchange for a significantly more involved grind. These were systems that should have stayed in the game and evolved with it as time went on, and their removal made the game feel significantly more hollow. Seasonal content being removed is part of why it frequently feels so lackluster. It simply isn't worth investing significant studio effort to create temporary activities. Episodes have almost figured this out with unique activities like the Nether or Court of Blades making more sense to develop thanks to each activity's longer lifespan. Mackle then makes the dreaded if you don't like it just quit argument, which is largely a non sequitur. We criticize the game, some more eloquently than others, because we love it, so why should it be a reason for us to quit? Even if it was though, there is nothing like Destiny out there and thus nowhere to migrate to. I don't even mean there are no other FPS MMOs, I mean there aren't even any other popular mid-range TTK arena shooters right now. If you know one, feel absolutely free to tell me. I'll play it in a heartbeat. The closest things are maybe like Marvel Rivals or Apex Legends, but those have significant differences, and aside from having their own issues, have a gameplay completely asymmetrical to Destiny. Essentially, Bungie completely cornered the market and has no competition. Additionally, when someone puts time and effort into good faith criticism that they hope can make a thing they love better, spitting in their face and saying just leave is in rather poor taste. Finally, because I think Mackle is really only addressing the screaming retards when he tells them to leave, I'm just mostly going to agree. If you legitimately hate the game and find nothing about it redeemable, yeah, you should probably go, man. Even if you've invested significant time or money, it's probably worth it to just learn another game at that point. That being said, Bungie should shoulder significant fault for this issue, as they did literally engineer this game to be as addicting as possible. The crowd of screaming retards is almost inevitable, because these people are addicted by design. Destiny 2's gameplay loop is quite casino-esque, and we wonder why people complain about it instead of quit. They literally can't. The game has a psychological chokehold on them. All we as players can do is to look at our collective Fent dealer and ask them if they'll make it tasty this time instead of lacing it with rat poison. They won't though, because they don't have to, unless they feel our collective addictions starting to fade, which is only evidenced by significant player drop-off. It follows then that any changes that follow from these types of situations will only be significant broad-stroke reforms when situations are dire, and thus rarely address smaller, long-standing issues that need fixing. Now, for 3 additional points that explain why player sentiment always seems so poor. Point 1. The monkey's paw. Bungie frequently trips up when trying to give us things we want due to greed, ignorance, or incompetence. Want some examples? We spent 3 years without a single new Crucible map, and the first thing they added when they quote-unquote renewed their focus on PvP was skill-based matchmaking. Weapons we want return with awful perks. Strike players get quote-unquote new strikes that are just recycled battlegrounds, but they're all mindless slogs with health-gated bosses. I have a friend who used to love the strike playlist, and he literally soft quit the game because it got so bad. We finally got Chatterwhite, but they time-gated a fucking 2-week event. It was only for like 3 days, but it's the principle of the thing. Decisions like this keep us constantly on edge, which leads to constant community tension and negative sentiment. Moving on to major point 2. PvP's continued degradation kills the game's replayability. This is my area of expertise, so this will be the longest section. There's a timestamp on screen if you want to skip to a TLDR and move on. PvP is the reason Bungie even survived as a studio when they first released Destiny, and this isn't debatable. Destiny 1 had huge content droughts, but its PvP community was so strong that they fought through all the bullshit to drag the game kicking and screaming to success. When all the content dries up, and it always does because people will always consume content faster than you can make it, where is there to go but PvP? PvP never dries up, never runs out of unique match compositions or loadouts to try, never runs out of goals to chase. There is was never an explicit best player, and if there was, they would have to fight tooth and nail to keep the spot. PvP is the lifeblood of live service, and the sooner studios realize this, the sooner we can stop wasting billions on Borderlands clones that play 7 times worse and are even less funny. Getting back on track, let's talk about how Bungie's treatment of said mode has explicitly resulted in worse experiences, and thus less player retention when the game gets dry of new content. Firstly, there is no new player's guide to PvP anywhere in the game. There is no sign that explains why recovery is the best stat, or why resist mods don't work in PvP. There is no welcome mat for your first 5 or so games to help you understand what's going on when you jump in. Hell, there isn't even a Crucible starter loadout that you can talk to Shaxx and pick up to learn that a primary and special weapon work well together. All of this is to say that just like Destiny 2, the barrier to entry is more like a fucking casemate wall. Over the years, Bungie tried to solve this issue in all the wrong ways. First, they tried to nerf the skill gap. AE, stompies, sliding, it all had to go. It didn't work though, so they reverted the most egregious changes, left some horrid ones in place, and tried skill-based matchmaking. When that expectedly killed player population by making matches unplayable to high-end and thus killing all motivation to improve, they started calling it outlier protection instead. When that didn't work, they finally actually loosened the SBMM enough that matches were almost playable, but it's still significantly worse than it was, because Destiny 2 simply isn't compatible with any kind of match curation outside of the loosest possible lobby balancing. Not only did they make PvP less fun for those who play it most, they also didn't solve the issue they set out to. Thus, we conclude on PvP issue 1. Bungie fails at capturing new PvP players and also fails at keeping the ones that are already invested happy. Moving past the new player issue, Bungie refuses to address incredibly damaging issues with the sandbox. Fusions literally exist. Abilities are still incredibly strong, particularly stasis, and new ones almost always ship insanely hot or unusably awful. Special ammo is wildly out of balance right now, with shotguns and fusions being the biggest culprits due to their riskier playstyles essentially rewarding players for getting one kill and dying. See also my video I made on the topic almost a year ago, and is still entirely relevant because Bungie hasn't changed shit. Neutral game, that is, non-ability movement, has been slaughtered on all characters that aren't Solar Warlock, and even Icarus Dash caught a nerf that made it significantly less cool. This makes getting around the map and avoiding massive AoE death balls significantly more annoying. Bungie continuously makes the easiest weapons to use also the best, which has had devastating effects on the skill gap. Therefore, we conclude PvP issue 2. This constant neglect / poor handling of the sandbox continuously damages the player base and absolutely slaughters morale. Lastly, on what I'm going to talk about today regarding PvP, Bungie hasn't fixed or even talked about massive issues with the game's foundation that make the game significantly worse. The game's networking is atrocious, even more so when it comes to crossplay, but you probably already knew that, so I'm going to move on before I brag on it for an hour. The art team destroys maps by making them incredibly inconsistent to play on. Strange, unexpected angles or head glitches that shouldn't exist are allowed to. Pieces of scenery can trip you up because they have needless hitboxes or interact with slides weirdly. Hell, the other day I lost a game because I slid, and instead of staying on the ground like I should have, I got launched 3 feet in the air. Zones, ammo boxes, and objectives are placed with seemingly no rhyme or reason, so maps and modes are frequently incredibly one-sided. There are infinite issues like this that I could go over, but for the sake of time I'll leave it here and thusly conclude the third PvP issue. The game has serious underlying issues that go unaddressed and constantly annoy you. This hurts players' sentiment and pushes PvP players to be even more negative. Still with me? Let's recap. PvP is the catch-all for content droughts, but has become incapable due to Bungie's poor handling. This has been horrible for the health of the game and, more on point, its player base. Moving on to major point 3, Destiny 2 is a live service game designed to be played for 10,000 hours that doesn't fix its 10,000 hour issues. Destiny 2 enemy AI is atrocious, they teleport all the time, are inconsistent, interact strangely, etc, etc. This was especially apparent during Contest Root of Nightmares, as Nezarec could randomly decide to wander around in Narnia, giving you no damage phase and then wipe you for this issue. This doesn't matter for most players as it can be easily ignored, but in the highest level content or after significant time investment, it will slowly start to drive you insane. Crowd control versus players is incredibly poorly balanced, as in high difficulty content you will frequently die due to no fault of your own, and in low difficulty content it's just as annoying because it slows you down and messes with combat flow. This probably won't even bother you until it happens for the 500th time, fucks your contest Salvation's edge clear, and makes you develop a sudden taste for red ceiling paint. Moving on, there are inconsistencies in the combat, frame rate based damage glitches due to bad netcode, eager edge tracking on enemies behind you, usually randomly or unpredictably, repetitively that constantly get in your head and mess with speedruns or farms. The first time your ego tracks behind you into a hole in Crota's Abyss, it'll probably be funny. By the 10th, though, it's really damn annoying. By the 100th, you're probably ready to go personally beat someone to death, and by the 1000th, you've probably already quit the game. Just like the PvP issues, there are seemingly infinite of these PvE ones as well. This constant grading on the most loyal and longtime players consistently brings down the mood surrounding the game. If these issues didn't exist, people would be significantly more ready to sing Bungie's praises when they get something correct. But right now, every positive change is made on a 7-year backdrop of unaddressed issues. That is why the sentiment surrounding Destiny 2 is always so bad. That is why the community seems so negative. That is why Bungie's smallest mistakes always seem to get them so much hate. They walk on thin ice they themselves warmed. It isn't all negative though, because all it would take is one significant market competitor to force Bungie to wake up. One successful FPS movement shooter would shake their PvP population to its core, and that could force Bungie to start paying attention again. A half-good PvP PvE FPS game would absolutely vacuum out Destiny 2's population in ways that Bungie would seriously have to lock in to recover from. Basically what I'm saying is, I really want Bungie to have any competition at all, because they would finally have to stop sitting on their collective thumbs. They would be forced to give us a good game or die, and last time that happened, Forsaken was made. To conclude this convoluted video, in which I tried to explain an even more convoluted topic, I want to talk about some good things that Bungie has done that give me hope for the future of this game, so we don't end on a note so sour that people mistake it for actual poison. Firstly, Guardian game supremacy. This mode is awesome and proves just how fun the game can be when Bungie stops tampering with the matchmaking. Secondly, Court of Blades and Rushdown. Even if I don't particularly enjoy the boss design, I absolutely love the fact that we're finally getting boss rush activities, as I think Destiny 2's DPS gameplay is one of the best parts of the game. Thirdly, I'm glad Bungie is finally putting some effort into endgame PvP rewards. Hopefully they'll realize that rewards need to be consistently updated and made to be farmable in some way in order to sustain player populations, but until then, I'll take what I can get. Lastly, on this little highlight reel of small W's, I want to talk about controller dead zones. Holy shit, if there has ever been a change as impactful, I don't know what is. It's like taking off the training weights and blindfold, then downing an entire white monster after having had no caffeine for a week. Your third eye opens when you play Zero Dead Zone on controller, I swear. That's all I've got to say. Christ is king, drop a sub, get out of here.